From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Thursday night, July 25th, 2024, as we record this new episode. Pulling back the curtain a little bit, we are recording this episode at 5 p.m. Central Time, which means in exactly 5 days of us recording this show, the MLB trade deadline will have arrived. And so far, we've seen nothing. 0 trades by the White Sox. Hell, nobody in Major League Baseball is making deals, despite 6 National League teams within 2 games of each other for the wild cards, and each of the division races within 5 games in the American League. The American League West now, Houston, Seattle, and Texas are all within 3 games of each other. So what's going on? We'll try to make sense of that and revisit our trade probability meter for the White Sox trade assets. On the field, the Chicago White Sox are now 51 games below 500, as they are 3-16 in July and have lost 11 straight games. Coming up next are the Seattle Mariners. Will the offense finally wake up for the White Sox, or will each of the White Sox starting pitchers need to be like old friend Dylan Cease and throw no-hitters? Lots to discuss, so let's get started. Joining me is Sox Machine's beat reporter, James Fegan. And hello, James. White Sox get swept by the Texas Rangers and have lost 11 straight games, and I think the offense is largely to blame for this losing streak. Is this the worst offense?
Hey, show some work here.
Is this the worst offense you've ever seen in Major League Baseball?
I know that it is. I've looked up the numbers. Nobody has scored this few runs per game since, I believe, the 1981 Blue Jays, and that was like a strike separated year. And you can say what you will about how the offensive error is such that I think relative to the league average, they might be even worse than that. So I know that they are the worst. I will say that I feel a little bit like a frog in a pot that's like boiling, that like the White Sox offenses have downgraded in such a way that's not like it went from 2021 to here. And I'm like, I can't believe what I'm watching. I'm very much like, yeah, they seem a little worse than last year's offense in the second half after they made some trades. And then looking it up, like, no team, not a 2013 Mariners team, no. Worse than that. No one's been sub 3.2 runs per game since the early 80s. Okay, so yeah, they're the worst. They are the worst. Not like in a derogatory personal way, but like I've looked up and they're the worst. It's amazing, but it's weird. It's like, I don't want to compare it to the banality of evil, but the way that it's just kind of like gotten normal to me and not stuck out to me is chilling, bone chilling.
And is it the strategy? Because against Texas, I wouldn't say they weren't patient. I mean, they were very aggressive early in the counts against all of the Rangers starting pitchers, attacking whatever fastball came into the zone to start the count, or if they thought it was a fastball, there's also a lot of grounders hit and weak contact made on sliders, as they didn't make great contact on those pitches, being hyper aggressive early in the count. I don't know what the offensive strategy is for the White Sox. Like, I don't know what the hitting approach is, James. Is it, just screw it, let's get this game over with as soon as possible and just swing at everything? Is this like me playing MLB The Show? There's no plate discipline anymore?
I've also, as someone who grew up with in the Moneyball area, how impatient I've been at swinging in MLB The Show is a big source of disappointment. To basically be Diane Vicieto in virtual form is very frustrating. This is again like where the frog in the pot. Their walk rate's probably a little bit higher than the last 2 years. They struck out a ton this past 4 games, but like they're top 10 in strikeouts, but they're not the Mariners. They're not like, literally the 2018 or 2019 team. So the years run together now that I'm aging, set the record at the time for the most strikeouts ever. Like they're not that level of like unable to make contact there, but they are like pretty bad with no real redeeming aspects at it. And I think, especially with how we all reacted to the lack of bat speed when those metrics came out in the White Sox roster, I think like lack of like talent in that aspect is leading to an approach that looks gnarly. Because I've had multiple Sox hitters say like their kind of approach was make sure they don't miss an early strike, because what they see at 2 strikes is really too nasty for them to like make contact with. Like there's not a bunch of guys whose bats are super fast to catch up to elite velocity like a Chris Robert, or really gifted at staying in the zone a long time and then making even weak contact or fouling off tough pitches. Like they're a team that doesn't really have that level of like skill in their hit tools to really battle with 2 strikes very well, or feel like they can wait out walks or make good contact. So a lot of them have these approaches like I better not miss my pitch. That's the only way I'm making a productive out. And it kind of compiles with kind of the struggles of the offense, that they're constantly doing stuff like hit and run the first time they have like someone on first base with less than 2 outs, because they feel like they got to create something. It's the perfect storm of perfect shitstorm comes to mind. But did I have a point? Do I have like a helpful thing to wrap up on? Less than half the year to go.
In the White Sox last 30 days, which spans 24 games, because again, of the All-Star break in between. As a team, they have a 606 OPS. As a team, they're hitting 211, a 268 on base percentage, and they're slugging 338. In their last 24 games, they only have 21 homers, and they have 78 runs scored during that stretch. And it becomes very glaring when you look at the 11-game losing streak the White Sox are on. They've only scored 20 runs total in their last 11 games. So if the White Sox are ever going to break this losing streak, it is very clear. They need to score like more than 2 runs in a game, because they're asking a lot of the White Sox starting pitching. So there's really nothing nice to say about the offense. I would love to have a wonderful Brooks Baldwin update. He did walk twice in the series finale, so that's good. But his swing mechanics, like, I'm sorry, this is not, he has no staying power if he continues to swing like he has been. And I don't know if this is the way that he was swinging in Birmingham and Charlotte. Jim says it's not. So I'm not sure what the game plan is for Brooks in the major leagues, but just swinging out of his shoes, swinging out of the bucket, whatever you want to say, completely off balanced. But he did walk twice against the Rangers on Thursday afternoon. So at least there's a bright spot for Brooks Baldwin.
He seems like you can see his front leg like pulling off towards the first base side like a lot on the finish of these swings, which suggests to me that like he's very conscious of like the level of new velocity he's facing and protecting his inner half and not trying to get beat by guys busting him inside, which makes him like, yeah, if you're facing a new level of velocity, that makes sense. And, there's certainly a lot of pitchers who are trying to like throw fastballs in on your hands, but it makes them very vulnerable to anything off speed or any guy like any lefty, or in this case, righty, who's controlling his arm side. It's not something that it was nice that he showed some ability to battle today and kind of a general knowledge of the zone. But even if he's swinging good pitches, the way he's currently kind of very tilted towards the inner half of the plate just makes it not really able to do much competitive stuff on outer half pitches.
The White Sox starting pitching, though, has been good. In the last 30 days, the White Sox starters have a 3.61 ERA. That's good for 7th in Major League Baseball. So the offense, the worst in Major League Baseball. Starting pitching, pretty close, actually, to being top 5 in the last 30 days, James. And you got a chance to chat with White Sox Director of Pitching Brian Bannister on a recent Zoom call. He spoke mostly about the White Sox draft, but I think he also shared some insight in the White Sox approach when it comes to the starting pitchers. And again, we're always trying to find hope within this organization, something that White Sox fans can attach to and know that this part of the team is going to get better and they can build around it. And I think it's pretty clear now that's the White Sox starting pitchers. And is this how we should be watching games in the last couple of months? Especially because it sounds like Bannister is suggesting all of the guys in the minor leagues at some point that are a pitcher you're going to see in Chicago before the season ends, because Brian Bannister, need to see on how they fare against major league hitters, even if it's coming out of the bullpen. So is this what we need to be watching? We just need to ignore the offense, James, and just focus on how the White Sox young starting pitchers are doing.
I want to say, like, the offense is obviously important. There's theoretically hitters on this lineup that will matter at least for next year, if not like the next contending year in some way. But yeah, I don't know how you've been getting this far into the season without really just focusing on the positives from the pitchers. And I don't think it's feasible to put like every good starter they've had in the minors like into the bullpen at the end of the year. You don't get that many call-up spots anymore, but it was definitely interesting that he suggested that basically for anyone who's really ready or someone they really want to like take a role in the rotation next season, that he likes to see them at the bullpen at the end of the year. And he touted the benefits of them, because the bullpen takes your stuff up a little bit. They'll both see success, but we'll also see how their stuff plays a little bit easier. And that they kind of will get acclimated to the rhythm of being in the major leagues without necessarily, these are all guys that play minor league seasons who hasn't necessarily are used to pitching a full 6-month schedule all the way out, and you'd want to taper them down anyway. Made sense to me, and it's certainly more interesting than like writing a lot of your veteran relievers till the better end. Like, I think we'll probably find out more about Nick Nastrini working out of the pen in September than necessarily Sammy Peralta. Not that they couldn't coexist. But it certainly offers something. And what I guess I could like about what he said about starting pitchers is that it's not like one cookie cutter. Like, yes, they've drafted Hagen Smith, and there are a lot of comps to Crochet or multiple breaking balls with the Rodon, like comparing that how much that might be a future path that Smith goes on. But what he has done to adjust Jonathan Cannon's arsenal, which is very like seam shift oriented, and he was kind of defending like it's really great that he's just kind of treading water, because we basically asked him to overhaul everything and do like this really complicated way of pitching that he's never handled before. I think it's interesting that he's able to kind of pick different arm slots and pitcher types across the organization and give seemingly unique tweaks to a lot, even if you can see some patterns across others. It's more in the vein of like, hey, you're like this guy who's had success, let's mold it to that, as opposed to like, give me an army of 10,000 tall lefties who all throw sweepers type of way to approach the pitching staff. So I think the diversity has been just as interesting as, how often we've heard like he throws a slider just like Chris Sale, and all the endorphins that get sent running through our veins when you hear something like that.
Don't tell our friend Beefloaf over from the 108, but I'm sweating a little bit when it comes to our steak dinner bet. And it's because of just how well the White Sox starters have pitched, even outside of Garrett Crochet and Erick Fedde. I mean, Drew Thorpe is on a heater right now. 5 consecutive quality starts. Jonathan Cannon has been pitching well for the White Sox. The only one that you kind of have to sweat as a White Sox fan of brace yourself is Chris Flexen, but even Flexen in his last outing, tons of pitches, 105 pitches, and only went 4 2/3. But he didn't allow that many runs. It's just the White Sox bullpen just seems to melt down every time Chris Flexen starts. By the way, the White Sox have lost 14 consecutive games that Chris Flexen has appeared in. So that's another type of losing streak the White Sox have going. I do want to circle back to a comment that you made about the White Sox hitters real quick. You think that there are some hitters that are going to be around definitely next year, but even in a hypothetical competitive season, whenever that may be, who is on that list for you on the position player side?
I mean, there's a chance to keep Robert. It certainly doesn't seem that way, but I don't think it's like 100%. Like, there's no way he's around for the long term, especially with his injury history. There's things that can take him off the market either this year or next in some way where he hangs on, or if the pitching makes you way more competitive next season than you think, and you're kind of like, I don't know if we want to throw away those next 2 years just yet, if we feel like we're already playing 500 ball next season by some miracle of Drew Thorpe and Jonathan Cannon and Wonder Twins combined. I certainly haven't loved what he's done offensively the last 2 months. I'm sure he hasn't either, but I don't think it's crazy to think Corey Lee could be your backup catcher in some season that's valuable, and any backup catcher means a guy you're prepared to be your regular catcher for a month on end, with all the swinging bats at thumbs and forearms that position contains. Brooks Baldwin, I think the reason that we're kind of worried about how it looks through less than 20 at bats is because we can't envision one, either him being the utility guy who plays a lot, like Larry Garcia type, or if Jacob Gonzalez, Colson Montgomery, Brian Ramos, basically third base, shortstop, second base. I think with all three of those, there's a scenario you can envision with them right now where they don't really click, and Baldwin winds up being the guy who becomes the regular at that spot, because none of them are hitting super great right now. So I think he carries some weight, even if it's not the how did you screw up this first round pick, because it's not clicking at the major league level. I think Baldwin being even an up and down guy, given his draft placement, is already a success. But you certainly have a vision for more with how he's looked in the minors up to this point.
So Brian Bannister is the director of pitching for the White Sox. Do you know of any major league teams that have a similar role, like a director of hitting?
I mean, technically the White Sox do right now, because like the traditional setup is Matt Zaleski is the pitching coordinator, and then they have a hitting coordinator whose name I don't want to butcher, because we haven't talked to them yet this year, though the White Sox said that we would. I've seen him at work. Alan Zinter, big scary bearded dude. So like they have that, but as far as like this kind of guru, so to speak, whatever you would want to call how Brian Bannister's role is unique to the organization, I think it's less common. I feel like there's some examples of hitting consultants who were super lauded that organizations have brought in maybe before the last 10-15 years. I can't say I can think of an exact like super success story of like a big fancy title inflation director of hitting type title that I would point to. I feel like it's a little harder to get the kind of hitting development wins that you see in pitching, where one mechanical tweak and they're throwing harder, or they added a pitch and that can't really be hit, and now all of a sudden this average profile has a swing and miss offering. It seems like you can't make those kind of like big conversions in profile that you can in pitching in hitting. So I'm not seeing someone that comes to mind. I think it's probably a bit harder to find a Brian Bannister of hitting, as Sox Machine commenters have brought up numerous times. But technically, the guy who's overseeing the plan of what minor league hitters in the Sox system are doing would be Zinter. Lots
of questions for Zinter. Yeah, I just saw his photo. Yeah, I would not want to mess with him. Looks, not gonna say looks scary, just looks intimidating.
he was down there in the ACL, and they had just put the leg kick on Javier Mogollon, who is still killing it, as we all knew he would. So I think worst season possibly ever in the majors aside, struggling with major prospects, when you deliver Javier Mogollon, you have 100% job security with me. So I think if anything, extension talk should be in order.
Well, until the White Sox offense starts hitting and scoring multiple runs, that's the key in a game. The losses will continue to pile up again. The White Sox are already 51 games below 500, and it's starting to really garner some national attention around outlets of this is going to be bad. Like, we joked about this in May. The White Sox are on pace to beat the Mets record. And now here we are in late July. Oh no, they really could break the 120 loss barrier. And Pedro Grifol could really break the records for worst winning percentage as White Sox manager, and one of the worst ever in the history of Major League Baseball. This episode is brought to you by Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. Game Time makes getting tickets even faster and easier, and prices of the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. The Chicago White Sox start a 6-game homestand against Seattle and Kansas City this weekend. But also keep in mind they have 2 popular series coming up in August, with the New York Yankees and Chicago Cubs visiting. Those will be very, very popular games to attend, and the third-party pricing outlets outside of Game Time are absolutely crazy right now for the Cubs series. Check out Game Time for their best deals for those series, and also use Game Time for other sporting events like the Chicago Sky, which those tickets are hard to come by these days. And football season is just around the corner with the Chicago Bears preseason games now available on the app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and use our promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off. Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
So the White Sox clearly need help on the hitting front. We didn't see a lot of high-end draft picks, maybe except with the exception of Caleb Bonnermer, the prep third baseman, but he's still got a ways to go before it gets to the majors on the position player front. And the hope was, from a White Sox fan perspective, that the MLB trade deadline would be a great way for Chris Getz to address that. Well, we are 5 days away from the trade deadline, and we are seeing very little movement around the league. We have yet to see any trades by the Chicago White Sox. If you told me a month ago that Tommy Pham and Erick Fedde would still be on the White Sox 5 days before the trade deadline, I'd be shocked. I would think that they've already been dealt by now, but nonetheless, they're still with the White Sox. So we have to revisit, our White Sox trade probability that we did a month ago, James, looking at the White Sox top trade players and low, medium, and high on their probability of getting dealt. And let's start with Garrett Crochet, because Crochet again was reported in The Athletic, which it seems like The Athletic is a little slow from what Bob Nightingale reported and what you were able to confirm with the contract extension part. And I think that's where it's going to catch White Sox fans a little off guard. So let me be clear and help me out on this front, James. What Crochet's side, and when I say Crochet's side, his agency, which is CAA, is asking for is that if Crochet gets traded before the deadline, in order for him to pitch in October, Crochet's representatives would like to negotiate a contract extension. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say like pitch in October. I'd say like to kind of waive the general like concerns or restrictions that they kind of have in place. Basically to have him work as a regular starter and just kind of push until there's an issue pops up, as opposed to like the current plan of, kind of monitoring and tapering his innings. I think they've signaled that they would like that assurance. Which I think if you're seeing your client making $100K and being thrown around as this hugely valuable chip, and it's about you assuming this risk without any guaranteed money while huge value is being exchanged above you for your services, I think saying like, hey, I want some value to kind of waiving what is not an unreasonable restriction on like this isn't even on the level of like Josh Hader kind of putting rules in place about how often he's used. I think any organization, any situation would not like go from 30 innings to 180, just step on the gas and not even think about, the level of stress that those, down to stretch innings or playoff innings would incur on top of that number of, a regular season full starter inning projection as well. So that was when Nightingale wrote that up whenever he did, I want to say around a month ago, and reaching out was that like, yeah, he made a lot of good points. And that was kind of one of them, is that this is the plan in place. If to waive that, which seems like a decently cautious plan. I don't think any of us have thought this was like overzealous protection, that they would want some sort of long-term assurances for him, mostly in the form of guaranteed money, which right now he's not getting very much of.
No, he's not. And with arbitration the next 2 years, if he blows out his elbow, punch a hole through your wooden door. That doesn't happen for Crochet and for the White Sox next time he pitches. But there's no guarantee through arbitration you're going to get a contract. We've seen it many times before the White Sox, now non-tender guys that are in arbitration because they just don't even want to bother meeting the asking price of carrying that player over. So I get it from Crochet's perspective of, we want guarantee money, we want a contract extension in order for you to have free reins to use Crochet however you want for the rest of the season in case of a trade. But if I was the team trying to trade for Garrett Crochet, that's where it gave me extreme pause, James, because we've had this conversation, even from a White Sox perspective. How do you negotiate a long-term contract extension with Garrett Crochet? It's tough. I mean, yes, he's an all-star now, but this is like the first taste you've ever seen Crochet pitch at this type of performance, especially as a starting pitcher. You've already experienced one major arm injury from Crochet and missed significant time. I would be hesitant from the White Sox side of things on a negotiated contract extension, and they know him best. For an outsider, I can see where I thought maybe last week Crochet being traded was high probability, like almost certain he was going to get dealt, to if this is a sticking point, then it's low for me. Like, I do expect Garrett Crochet not to be traded before the deadline if this is going to be a sticking point with the contract.
Yeah, it's certainly, I mean, I'm aware of, reports 3, 4, or 5 days out of like, oh, I don't know if we'll get fair value before the deadline. It seems, pretty convenient stance to take at this juncture, but it's certainly a complicating factor. And it's just really hard to see the player and agent side of like, hey, this is a premier starter, pay him premier starter level salary for this and the next 2 years, or for however many years they buy out, lining up with what teams' models will say, like, this is his track record, which is pretty light, and here's what we project the injury risk and the innings projection based on what he's done, really lining up. So yeah, I think I certainly wouldn't go on the record I wouldn't put my vote down for a high likelihood now. I would probably hedge and put medium, but if you have a compelling case for putting it to low, I would listen to you.
We can put it back to medium because it was high. So we'll put it back to medium. I'm leaning from medium to low, rather than medium to high. We'll see, but I can understand from an outsider's perspective, like, well, if his agent in Crochet himself is not going to be willing to allow us to use him however we want after a trade, then I don't want to meet Chris Getz' asking price. And that's another part of the logic that has to be figured out. And speaking of asking price, there is Luis Robert Jr. And again, there are teams that need Luis Robert. The Seattle Mariners are a team that needs Luis Robert. There are rumors that the Dodgers have asked about Luis Robert. And when it comes to trade probability for Robert, this is already going to be complicated. It was going to be a high asking price, but I'm not sure if Robert is still... I mean, right now he's a little cold. He did hit a home run on Wednesday, but he's cooled off again after he had a bit of a hot streak that made me thought, well, maybe a team will meet Chris Getz' asking price before the deadline to have 3 years of Luis Robert. At this moment, we were low a month ago. I pushed it up to medium. James, how are you feeling about the trade likelihood for Luis Robert 5 days out to the deadline?
I guess I'd tilt lower. Yeah, he hasn't been great. It's never seemed as eager to do it as they have been with Crochet. They've never really talked about it being like a good spike in value opportunity as they feel like it is with Crochet. you can squint and see him like on a future decent team. So at the same time, like there's not really like a ton of bats out there, and certainly in terms of like a power bat who can play you like a plus center field, it's a rare commodity. It's a big chip to be holding in a true seller's market. So it's hard to say like nothing crazy will be happening in the last 48 hours from a desperate club, but um, certainly, the Brewers are looking at a long absence without Christian Yelich. They're not traditionally the huge deadline buyers though. But there's similar things like that can pop up still in the last couple of days that, change the landscape a little bit. But I would lean low medium, I guess. Medium rare.
We'll put Robert low. We'll put Crochet medium.
A lot of pink in that state.
A lot of pink. I did put this up on Twitter, our show poll, which you can follow me on Twitter at @SoxMachine_Josh. You can follow our general account at SoxMachine. And of course, you can follow James at JR Fegan. And the show poll, do you think Luis Robert Jr. and or Garrett Crochet will be on the White Sox 2025 opening day? And out of the four options, Robert only, Crochet only, both, or neither, the most popular answer to our followers on Twitter was neither. 39.5% that participated in the poll think that Robert nor Crochet will be on the White Sox opening day roster. 31% believe Luis Robert will be on the opening day roster in 2025, but not Garrett Crochet. And I bring this point up, James, because there's this deadline, and in 5 days, if Crochet and Robert don't get dealt, we're going to have these same conversations again come November and December when the MLB offseason gets started with the GM meetings in November and the winter meetings down in Dallas, Texas in early December. And just like Dylan Cease, which we'll talk about that old friend later in the show, as he did something pretty cool today, this is just going to continue on until they are finally dealt, which makes it a little annoying. I would love to have a resolution of what's going on for the White Sox, but in order for them to find long-term pieces on the position player front that can suddenly change the future outlook of what's going on with this offense, because it's dreadful and it's the worst we've ever seen, I still feel like the only way they acquire those position players, James, because I just don't have a lot of confidence in Jerry Reinsdorf suddenly waking up and deciding to throw tons of cash in free agency, is trading Crochet and Robert. And the longer that Chris Getz and the White Sox hold on to them for the right price, the longer it seems like White Sox fans are going to have to wait to see some type of future of better position players other than, well, I sure hope Colson Montgomery and Brian Ramos start hitting in AAA, because if they don't, let's go, Edgar Caro, because you're our only hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you're, say, Jerry Reinsdorf, you want this turnaround immediately, and he's done it at least before, not to successful levels, but looking at the 2014 team and being like, all right, that was enough rebuilding. What do we need to do to get out of this? I think you could look at the starting rotation and say like, all right, that's a good starting base here. How many games would we win if we didn't have like the worst bullpen high leverage performance ever? That's been my price range. Let's buy a couple decent relievers, and then one bat that'll lift all boats, right? And just get everyone else healthy. Or maybe two bats. Who knows if they get crazy? We've certainly seen them turn around too soon before, and I think ownership could say like, hey, if we have these two star players, will that make it a little bit easier to do it quickly, or spend less money doing it? There's history of that. I certainly don't think that's the front office is leaning on it. I think they're more of the idea of let's sell everything and start from the ground up and build a team in our image. Our image being versatile defensive guys who are, their GM, assistant GM, and player development head. They've made one or two jokes about that. So I don't think I think the leaning is certainly to trade whatever they have and, cash out the most of it. It's just about where and when and how will they, actually catch their best ceiling, and trying to be a little bit choosy with it because they feel like they are at least holding more cards than the most in a situation where it's a seller's market.
So while we wait on Crochet and Robert, let's move over to Erick Fedde, which Erick Fedde can net someone interesting for the White Sox to add to the farm system. But James, I'm a bit dumbfounded. Why is Erick Fedde still with the White Sox? Like, what is it about Erick Fedde that other major league teams have yet to trade for him?
I mean, we haven't really seen a lot of trades. I would say it goes beyond, the White Sox. Like, why is Jazz Chisholm still on the Marlins? Why is Tanner Scott still there? I don't think we're necessarily at the point yet where it should be, panic because things haven't moved yet. I certainly heard some chatter they were back in June, especially with Crochet and his innings limits. There's a little bit of oh, maybe the Sox will try to jump the starters market and sell what they have before more uncertainty creates. But I think this is playing out the way we expected, where there's not many pieces able, so you feel like it's not like there's 15 relievers on the market and you want to make your trade a week into it just to make sure you unload them and get something for it, and don't get left holding the bag when the buyers run out. I think they're in a situation where they can kind of hold on and really wait till the last moment and see what the offers are, and not feel like that sellers are going to back out on them because there's a bunch of other guys to go with. It's not like Fedde and Crochet are the only stars available, but I certainly feel like they should feel empowered to wait till the end and not like they're going to get run out of offers.
Chandler Rome, who covers the Houston Astros, tweeted out that the Astros are interested in Chicago Cubs starter Jameson Taillon. So that's the latest rumor outside of Erick Fedde that's currently.
And I would think that's a less valuable piece, even if you think he's compared comparable to Fedde this season. He's getting paid a lot more. So I think that would be the lower tier of at least prospect cost. I think Taillon has maybe 2 extra years on this, but they're not cheap. So I would think that's comparable to Fedde, but I don't think it would make you panic, oh my God, everybody's moved on type of situation if he gets moved.
So we're still high probability for Fedde getting dealt before the deadline, right? We're not lowering this.
I don't see what the argument would be not to for them, given that they won't even commit to 2026 being a contention season, holding on to Fedde for 2025. I know the big offer the Bloom way hasn't come yet. And there could be some frustration with that, but I don't think it climaxes with holding on to him and only selling him for, 1 season of control or less later down the road.
And then the other 4 players that we had, Paul DeJong, Tommy Pham, Michael Kopech, and John Brabia. Kopech's been throwing better as of late, so I can still see Kopech getting dealt. He does have an extra year of control. We had him at medium probability. Should we bump that up to high? Are you getting a feeling that he could be dealt in 5 days?
Certainly from talking to him, and not like he said I'm getting dealt or I'm getting out of here, but just the way he's very mentally prepared for the possibility. And some of that can just be scanning the room or just doing logic out. He's a hard throwing reliever with a year and a half left of not expensive control, and it's a seller's market for a team that's selling everything. But he certainly doesn't feel like he's at some spot where he can, I want to be here when this turns around and it's going to get listened to or change the course of the team, at least from talking to him. So yeah, I think anybody looks at that potential. I know teams have asked for him, a couple times over the last couple of months, or just asked about his value. So it's not like there's no interest or anything like that. The way you'd worry about Eloy or Yohan, or the way we've resigned ourselves with Eloy and Yohan, there's just not going to be anybody picks it up. I think there'll be people in on Kopech, but it's just a question of price. And if the Sox are hopefully someone will pay for him a proven closer, and more teams are really like that fastball. We'd love to have our hands on it. We're not going to cry if we don't.
Yeah, I see that the White Sox have been pitching him more in the 7th and 8th innings in his last couple of outings. Do you think that's on purpose from the front office to showcase Kopech outside of the closer role, to give teams an idea of how they could use him for their teams?
Not really. I don't think that's a specific inclination. I think Pedro's moved him around a fair amount. He's never been a super strict closer guy outside of Liam Hendricks possibly pitching through a Tommy John strain injury. Pedro's, if anything, is the 7th inning has become the 7th inning with their bullpen has kind of become what was it? Javi Vasquez, the 6th inning back in 2011, where Pedro having just almost magical boogie man curse on it. Is like I'm tired of like us getting burnt in the 7th inning with like basically our third best reliever very often. I think if like the heart of lineup is coming up, that he wanted to be a bit more aggressive in using Brevi or Kopech in it just to change something a little bit. So I didn't think it was particularly trade showcasing as much as like, please stop losing type of tinkering around.
Yeah, and John Brevi, I'll still put on high, even though he hasn't pitched well in his last couple of outings. I don't know if that's just batted ball luck, because he had been pitching really well prior to the Kansas City series and against the Texas Rangers. But I still think John Brevi, the chances of him getting dealt are pretty high. Paul DeJong and Tommy Pham, I don't know now, James. Like, I could see them getting dealt, and then I could also see them getting DFA'd after the deadline, or at some point before the season's end. Like, I don't know the timeline of where it makes sense to continue carrying these guys. Like, I don't know if it makes sense to carry Paul DeJong and Tommy Pham for the rest of the regular season, James, if the White Sox don't trade them in the next 5 days, if that makes sense. At some point, you need to figure out who in Charlotte, give them some time in the major leagues to see if they're interesting enough to compete for a spot on the 2025 White Sox roster. Because I don't think, unless you've heard differently, I don't think Paul DeJong and Tommy Pham are part of the White Sox plans in 2025.
No, and there are definitely guys that you talk to, and it's clear that they expect to be traded as well. DeJong certainly hasn't been great, certainly not getting on base the last month. But I think what I said about him probably a month ago is still true now. He's playing better this year than he was last year when he got moved. As like a versatile infielder who will run into like some power, I think he's useful, even if it's not like this is how we win type of return. They're not getting someone who's going to rank above Hagen Smith on the prospect list back for them. I don't think these are impactful moves. I don't think Tommy Pham's getting you back a top 100 prospect again, like he did last time. And even that was like the only way he could, where it's a teenager with a lot of like upside, who's extreme risk, who his value was like jumped up drastically over the 3-month span since when he was traded to the end of the season. But I still think, Pham hasn't been great since his hot start, but I think he's still a pretty known commodity, where if your team is just like, we need a corner outfielder, even if it's just for a guy that we mostly just play to hit lefties, it might be a role that like Pham is left like enchanted with and kind of the everyday guy he was for the Diamondbacks last year. But I still think it's a major league quality player that maybe just gets you a relief prospect arm or something, like not nearly as grandiose as we thought when he first hit the ground running. But I still think these are guys who have enough skill set to get moved to the deadline to some team just for need for depth, especially when there's so few sellers to really get that depth from.
Let's say things get weird and they don't get dealt before the deadline. Could they be DFA'd some point in August?
Maybe some point. Like, they're not like flush with outfielders. If you're really like, I would think Corey Julks is kind of like, someone they're just barely playing, not even playing really regularly anymore, would be on that line before Pham is. Pedro loves Pham. He, at least I don't think it's as easy. I don't think he's a guy that you make into like a once a week player and he's the old head vet in the clubhouse type of dude. I don't think he'd love that. I think he wants to play every day and compete. But I think he'd be a useful guy, and they view him as a generally positive example of the clubhouse, and at least in his work methods, that I don't think it's like, get this guy out of here if we don't move him. But I really think he'll be moved. I think DeJong, like, if things are crazy and doesn't get moved, that would be a lot more likely scenario if you had Montgomery, Ramos both knocking on the door and both demanding playing time, or if like they seemed more interested in giving run to Lenyn Sosa, which they really don't. But right now, it's not like you're overloaded with infielders that you love giving at bats to that would push him out, or he's holding people back in AAA or a block. So I'm extremely bullish on both of them getting moved, but also I don't think the stars are quite lined up where they're blocking a top prospect. And it's like, if they're not trade assets. You got to get them out of this clubhouse immediately, type of situation. I mean, DeJong is definitely no one's bad clubhouse guy either, while we're on the subject.
So to recap, our trade probability for the White Sox players that can be targeted in deals: Garrett Crochet, we're lowering it back to medium, so 50-50 chance that he gets dealt. Luis Robert Jr., we're going to put that at low. We'll give it like a 25% chance he's dealt. Michael Kopech, John Bravia, Tommy Pham, Paul DeJong, give it what, 90% chance that they're dealt?
Sure. Let's go crazy, even though deals are complicated.
Yeah. And then Erick Fedde, 99% chance he's dealt in the next 5 days. I guess to be really pessimistic.
Now I feel like something's just going to go wrong.
Yeah, right?
We're 99.
To be pessimistic, what would it say of Chris Getz if he makes no trades before the deadline? Because in recent history, we have seen a White Sox GM end up not accomplishing much before a deadline.
If he makes no trades.
0 trades. If he's not able to get a deal done before the deadline.
Like less than Jake Diekman for Reese McGuire. Less active.
Less than that, yeah.
I would say some sort of medical issue, hoping he feels better. Obviously very scary. Like clearly he's lost his faculties. It's such a stressful time for days on end. Praying for his health and recovery, and peace for his family. That would be my assessment if that would happen.
Okay, so unlikely. All right. Well, again, next 5 days should be busy for the White Sox. They are definitely open in selling. But Chris Getz was also asked about Pedro Grifol and the White Sox team progress. Daryl Van Schouwen of the Chicago Sun-Times caught up with Chris Getz down in Texas. And when asked about Grifol, Getz said, quote, "The message I convey to the staff is they need to continue an environment for these guys to get better. There's parts of the team to feel good about and parts we don't feel good about. And we certainly need to see progress in all of these areas. I know they're staying at it, they're focused, but we certainly need to start seeing progress as the season comes to an end in the next couple of months," end quote. When I read this quote, and you've gotten a chance to interview Chris Getz multiple times, James, like, I get the impression Getz is going to allow Pedro Grifol to manage the rest of this season, but I don't know how he's going to track progress and what meaningful progress Pedro Grifol and the 2024 Chicago White Sox can accomplish post-trade deadline that allows Grifol to keep his job to be the manager of the 2025 White Sox. Like, they're going to have to go on like a 25-game winning streak. All of a sudden, everyone has an 800-plus OPS hitting. I don't know. Like, what can you speculate? What kind of progress do the White Sox need to accomplish in order for Grifol to save his job?
I don't know. It seems unlikely.
Yeah, because to your point on that, like rereading the quote, maybe this is why Getz is already saying out loud why he is going to be fired, because
this is not the first refusal to give a vote of confidence or to say like things are not good enough.
There's parts of the team to feel good about. We talked about that, the starting pitching. So thank you, Brian Bannister and Ethan Katz. There's others we don't feel good about. Everything else, Pedro.
Yeah, I mean, I think he said many times like they're aware of their defensive ratings, since that was such a primary goal for them at the start of the season, to play a higher IQ baseball. And basically they thought they would outperform their projections based on, the competence of the team and their defensiveness and their fundamentals. Instead, they're wildly underperforming any reasonable projection because they are still the worst in the league on that. By most measures, defensively, not good base running, not good plate discipline. Like, we knew that they didn't have a ton of like offensive talent, but they're not executing an approach that maximizes in any way. They're not keeping themselves in games despite probably better starting pitching than anticipated, seeing as they thought Mike Clevenger was so necessary to really take advantage of it because their defense is so poor. So I think all the on-field things that Grifol was supposed to be able to control this season and give some claim of a good job, even if, the team wasn't actually going to compete for any playoff spot. I think they've failed at it. And so that would be the area of progress. I don't know what major turnaround is going to be, because if anything, you're going to have less experience and more rookies who would just make these mistakes because of where they are in the experience level, rather than seeing a big upturn in the maturity of their defensive execution over the final 2 months. So based on what it seemed like the front office attitude towards the manager was before any of this happened, and what performance they can hold up to them as the sign of the progress, I don't think it looks very bright. But I think the one caveat that we know is that ultimately it's not the front office who makes the final call on whether to move on to the manager. Is the one little wild card from a situation that would otherwise be determined, or probably would have happened already mid-season.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's a writer in the Chicago Sun-Times. He's still got a few days left. If he's right about his report, Joe Cowley, that Pedro Grifol will be fired in July. He wrote that a long time ago. And we'll see if that comes to fruition. But yeah, I guess rereading that quote, Getz maybe is signaling we feel good about some parts of the team and other parts we don't feel good about. And we need to see progress. And we're not seeing it. Not great for Pedro's future job security. I'm assuming Pedro Grifol, as we record this, he's still the manager of the White Sox, and I'm assuming Pedro's still the manager of the Chicago White Sox as they return home for the first time since the All-Star break to face the Seattle Mariners. This is a big series for Seattle. A month ago, they had a 10-game lead over the Houston Astros. Now, they're a game behind the Houston Astros in the American League West. The Seattle Mariners are 53-51. They have lost 8 of their last 10 games. They have a 3-game losing streak entering this weekend. The good news for the Mariners, the Houston Astros do not have an easy weekend. They will have to face the Los Angeles Dodgers at home this weekend. So there's a chance here that Seattle, if the Dodgers play their part, they can reclaim the lead in the American League West with a good weekend. The Mariners this season, though, not a good road team. They're 22-28, and they're just a game and a half ahead of the Texas Rangers, in which the Rangers this weekend will be visiting the last place Toronto Blue Jays, and that Blue Jays team's got a lot of questions before the trade deadline they have to answer as well. Your pitching probables for this series Friday night at 7:10 p.m. Central Time. George Kirby will take the ball for the Mariners against Drew Thorpe, who is trying to make it 6 straight starts of 6 innings and allowing 2 runs or fewer. Saturday at 6:15 p.m. Central Time. Good God, they are putting this game on national television, James. All the poor people watching this on Fox. Brian Wu against Erick Fedde, maybe, question mark on the Fedde part. Sunday at 1:10 p.m. Central Time, Bryce Miller against Garrett Crochet. James, the big question for me, you'll be there this weekend covering the games for us at Sox Machine, especially on Saturday and Sunday. Will the White Sox score 8 runs this weekend? That's what I'm asking for. Can they score 8 runs this weekend total?
The stars are not lined up for them great. I will say...
It's a bunch of righties with great sliders.
Yeah, there's that. I want to talk myself into the notion that, like, the only team, well, like, they don't win any games. There's no model of, like, games they win. But the team you would think they would upset, like, one, it would need to be at home because they've just been atrocious on the road. And 2, it would need to be like some atrocious vibes, spiraling team that's banged up, maybe just lost JP Crawford and Julio Rodriguez to the IL, maybe just had Gregory Santos hurt his knee on a balk a couple days ago. A team that seems to be spiraling in a lot of ways, just sent a beloved first baseman packing to maybe shake up the clubhouse a little bit. I could certainly see, like, losing 2 out of 3 in some weird fashion being like this incredible come to Jesus or all is lost type of moment for the Mariners. And that's where I could see, like, somehow getting the 8 runs in some way with some defensive mishap leading to a 5-run inning somewhere. But man, they've I mean, they've had a 14-game losing streak. They've started 3-22. I don't want to say, like, I think there's a lot of recency bias in saying this 11-game losing streak is the worst they've looked all year, but it's certainly up there. It's certainly not something I look at and mean like the 3-22 start is like, well, if they add Pham, maybe things will get rolling offensively. And the 14-game losing streak, they had plenty of. There's probably more hope about Robert coming back or Moncada, Eloy coming back, lifting some level of play. I don't know what the light at the end of the tunnel is right now. It seems like it's probably a train taking away most of the pitching staff. So it's hard to say, like, especially when you could be losing good starters while the series is going on, that things are going to turn around against the Mariners. But if there's a team that can jolt the White Sox with their own bad vibes, it seems like it could be Seattle. If not, I don't know. Surely there's some cupcakes on this schedule yet that the White Sox can clean up on. That's gotta just be around the corner, the series that's going to get them all back. Why not this one?
Well, if it's not Seattle, they're at home against Kansas City, who they've only beaten once. And then after that, the trade deadline, they go to Minneapolis to face the Twins. And then after that, they travel to Oakland. So I'm not seeing, like, I know Oakland's in last place, but Oakland's getting feisty as of late. They're starting to hit.
Mason Miller just broke his hand, so
oh, there you go.
Obviously the White Sox will be able to come back late, like they are, prone to doing.
Yeah, I don't see that cupcake happening. I'm expecting this losing streak to be 14 games when we record again Sunday night or before then. If the White Sox do make any trades, and again, be ready. I've been ready. We'll have our emergency Sox Machine podcast when the White Sox do start making these trades. I hope that we are speaking to you guys before we record again on Sunday night, which means the White Sox have been making some moves and they're being active and they're shuffling some things around. So we have something to look forward to in August and September. But we're going to conclude this podcast episode revisiting with our old friend Dylan Cease, who did something very cool Thursday afternoon. Dylan Cease finally pitched a no-hitter. And I say finally because if you recall, a couple years ago, he was just 1 out away before Luis Arraez of the Minnesota Twins singled to break up Cease's no-hitter when he went 8 2/3 innings against the Minnesota Twins. Well, he didn't have to worry about Luis Arraez this time because Arraez is his teammate. He just needed to get C.J. Abrams out, which that's an inside joke for us at Sox Machine. Ex-shortstop for James Fegan's
14-1. 14-1 without him.
And fantasy baseball team. But yeah, C.J. Abrams flew out, and Dylan Cease pitched a no-hitter. 114 pitches for Cease against the Washington Nationals. And Cease in his last 3 starts is just on a crazy run. 22 innings in his last 3 starts, just 2 hits allowed. 2 hits allowed. In his previous 2 starts, he only allowed 1 hit in each of those appearances. 3 consecutive scoreless outings for Dylan Cease, and 30 strikeouts. Like, this is the type of stretch that could catapult somebody into the conversation of Cy Young in the National League. We'll see if Cease can continue this momentum. But James Cease finally did it. He finally got his no-hitter. And at least for the San Diego Padres, this trade is working out very well for them.
Who really comes to mind about being on like a crazy run is, my fantasy team with Carlos Correa, Mike Trout on the IL, even after kind of recklessly losing C.J. Abrams in the Rule 5 draft a couple of years back, 14-1, top of the league, 99% playoff probability, especially after having the best record in the league last year and having a disappointing, first round exit, despite a number of maybe regrettable win now deals at the deadline. We're not going to repeat that error this year. Yet have maintained the same level of performance because of the unity in the clubhouse. But yeah, it was almost it was good symmetry to see Cease get that like liner to right center caught this time. He got that slider to C.J. Abrams a little bit lower than he got it to Luis Arraez 2 years ago. Still probably a little bit higher than his catcher wanted it, but Luis Camposano seemed a little bit happier post game than Seby Zavala did back in 2022. So congrats to him. An absolute pleasure to cover. Wonderful to see him grow all the way from, first interviewing him in Kannapolis to seeing him now. I'm like, he's still down to a 3.5. He really had that slow period, back in, I want to say June, that spiked his ERA. I think he'd have to keep it on from here on out to really put himself in the conversation, and might need to be dependent on something as quickly as the Padres performing well and making the playoffs to really get that national attention to what he's doing. But it's good to see him throwing hard again and fully healthy and hitting 100 in the ninth inning after he was dealing with his velocity being down a tick all last season. It's good to see these stay durable, despite probably being no one's pick to be the Iron Man starter when he was coming up as a prospect, undergoing TJ before even being drafted.
Yeah, Dylan Cease, prior to his start against the Washington Nationals, ranked 6th in the National League when it comes to WAR. So who is Cease trying to chase down for that National League Cy Young frontrunner? Another old friend, Chris Sale, who leads the National League in WAR for the Atlanta Braves with a 13-3 record and 18 starts.
Pitching the This is a fun show. I mean, this is just like a lot of just like talking about fun things.
Oh, what a way to end. That'll do it for this episode.
How people spend their free time.
That'll do it for this episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. And again, I am hoping that we speak with you prior to the deadline or prior to even Sunday nights when we record a new episode. But we'll see. But we'll keep an eye on things. James will have the pregame coverage for you guys Friday against the Seattle Mariners, and he'll be at Guarantee Rate Field for the Saturday and Sunday games for Sox Machine. So if there is any breaking news at the stadium, James will be covering for us at Sox Machine. So follow us on Twitter and all the social media platforms at Sox Machine. Follow James at JR Fegan. You can follow me at Sox Machine_Josh. Subscribe to the Sox Machine Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can also listen to the show and watch it on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. If you want full access to our coverage of the Chicago White Sox and full access to all the coverage and writings from James, sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where monthly plans start at $5. There's numerous benefits you can take advantage of, including ad-free versions of both the website and the podcast, an opportunity to join a group chat with James, Jim, and I, along with other members of our Veterans Committee. If you are interested, again, you can acquire at patreon.com/Sox Machine. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.